I started this journey uncertain as to where it would take me. I wanted to understand where my breakfast came from. I thought it would be simple. Oh, how wrong I was.
Film isn't a platform. It isn't pixels. It isn't 1080 by 1920. It's an idea. It's a message. And in this message, in this platform, I'm telling you, we can change something.
I enrolled in an environmental science course at York University. My home faculty is film. I felt out of my depth when learning about NAFTA, permaculture, and other sustainability concepts. Moreover, the course being located in Costa Rica, a country I'd never been to before, it was daunting. Despite this, on May 11th, 2018, I flew away to Costa Rica with my 16 other classmates, Deborah Barnt and Ana Maria Martinez. We explored tradition and trade, each of us being instilled with a better understanding of where our food comes from and who produces it. This trip informed the film that you're about to watch. We took pit stops at local waterfalls and ate at local farmers markets. It all starts with this.
An inviting supermarket. White walls, chock-a-block with fruit, veggies, cereal, ice cream, coffee. A cornucopia of colour and smells. Let's be more specific though. Pineapples, delicious. Beans, wholesome. Coffee, aka God's gift to the planet. All of these foods are exports of Costa Rica. Let's discuss pineapples first. Some facts. South and Central America produce over a third of all the world's pineapples. In Costa Rica, Padego is the major pineapple producer. The company is a subsidiary of Del Monte. Del Monte controls 50% of the country's exports. Del Monte produced 10 million boxes of pineapples a year, enough to fill 2,688 Olympic-sized swimming pools. They own 20,000 acres of land, the size of the Scottish island of Benbecula. And just like the Vikings who sailed to that island, Del Monte has a questionable impact. For you to understand the locals who are affected by Del Monte, I am going to take us back to 1980s El Salvador. Oscar Romero served as the fourth Archbishop of San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador. Romero spoke against poverty and social injustice.
Muy poderoso es la voz de tierras lejanas y por eso juicios imparciales.
On March 23, 1980, he was delivering a sermon speaking against the abuses and oppressions, deposing death squads and criticising the right-wing government that was supporting them. After finishing his call to arms, he walked to the middle of the altar where he was shot, falling backwards. Romero bled to death on that altar. Later it was discovered that the US-backed government had assassinated him.
This was the story that I was told in the forests of Costa Rica, because Oscar Romero became a martyr.
The assassination drew international interest to El Salvador and started the 12-year civil war. Bombs were dropped and many lost lives, all leading to a massive exodus, where a quarter of El Salvador populace emigrated to neighbouring South and Central American countries. 20,000 migrated to Costa Rica. Many were given seeds to work with and land to work on. The programme was very successful in acclimatising refugees. Many travelled to Longo Mai, a small community with ambitions for agriculture and self-sufficiency, originally started by the French.
This was the community that I visited, Longo Mai, meaning may it last long. And true to its name, 50 years later, 2018, the community still thrives.
With 400 inhabitants living on a couple of thousand acres of protected soil. I met with Guadalupe Urbina, a Mexican singer who explained the problem that Longomai and Costa Rica faces. The community was built upon living sustainably, but this way of life has been threatened. It is surrounded by the Del Monte pineapple plantation on all sides. Drinking water has been poisoned and the topsoil polluted by use of harmful pesticides. Many surrounding communities have relocated to avoid the newly toxic environment.
To skip is a word, I don't know, to skip these agrotoxics and this horrible way of growing food that is happening right now. Monocultives is a word, yeah, okay. That all these toxic things comes into our body and make us sick, right?
Guadalupe and others are fighting for the environment, causing Longomai to be nicknamed Green Lung, a metaphor for breathing life back into the jungle. But deforestation continues, burning forests to make space for more crops.
But what is the heart of this problem?
Neoliberal trade.
Neoliberal trade really was about, in many ways, deregulating food systems, pushing these countries into producing for export, for the most part, and in many ways affecting then local production and food sovereignty, the right for people to actually produce in their own land, in their own practices, food for their own consumption that has also all the cultural meanings that they give to it.
I can explain you, for example, my farm is a small farm. I have very different plans for the sick, for the problems in the Costa Rican people and American people all the world.
Change has begun, with the lobbying being done by activists in Longomai and all across the country. Go to their website for more information. Problems with neoliberal trade do not cease there. Look no further than your cup of coffee. Costa Rica arguably produces the best coffee in the world. This is in part due to the quality standards and climate being between 17 and 28 degrees. However, there is a problem. Gavin Friedel explores this problem in his book Fair Trade Coffee, The Prospects and Pitfalls of Market-Driven Social Justice. He looks at the Inter-American Coffee Agreement, IACA. The agreement is aimed at stabilizing the prices of coffee.
What a latte would cost in Canada. And we figured it was something like $2.50, and he would get 28 cents out of that $2.50. So when you think about what the farmer who's producing in the South gets out of something that's sold in the North, you have all of the other intermediaries that that are profiting from that production. So that's the food chain, that we really need to think about critically.
This trip taught me that there are other alternatives to tariffs. For example, Raquel, who is advocating for local bean farmers.
2012, I think, we were consuming more Chinese beans than Costa Ricans, and the gallo pinto is the most famous Costa Rican dish, and it's a dish that the families, they eat once or two times a day. So if we think about where does this food come from, we don't even know, even if we think it's a super tico. And the idea about this is to show up this information in different ferias del agricultor around the country, farmers market, and also in activities and in protests regarding to agriculture.
So we were focusing this year on the impact of those agreements on bean producers, because historically beans have been such an important part of the diet, and bean producers were primarily producing for domestic consumption. Now 35% of the beans come from China, and imported from China can be bought more cheaply than the Costa Rican beans. So that's partly one of the results of these kinds of neoliberal trade agreements. Of course, depends on very cheap labor in China. So, there are also implications for the Chinese on the other side. So I found it very interesting that Raquel, chose to help us focus on those questions of what's happened to bean producers.
Towards the end of my trip, I became aware that art and education, intertwined, had the ability to facilitate change.
OPIRG publication released a booklet titled The Supermarket Tour. It describes what we see and don't see inside a supermarket. It outlines a number of disconnects. Firstly, distancing at supermarkets. Items seemingly appear out of thin air, clad with labels that have vague production locations and photographs of smiling consumers with no mention of the workers. Labels are misleading. Consumers have been disconnected from the food. Production has adopted an out-of-sight, out-of-mind philosophy, and consumers have lost connection with their food. Gone are the days where you could go down to your local supermarket and meet the farmer. This can be traced back to supermarkets becoming corporate enterprises for cheap food being produced over health